This mulberry vase and video are to honor Bill Fenton's 50 years of service to the Fenton Art Glass Company. After a brief sketch of Bill's career, you will join my father Frank and my uncle Bill in an impromptu tour of the museum concentrating on the people and products of the last 50 years. It's the real history of Fenton, told by the two people who make it happen. I know you will enjoy their stories as much as I did, and then you will see the production process on the mulberry vase so that you can appreciate the unique skills of our hand artisans and our hand decorators. So let's meet the young Bill Fenton.
Bill Fenton was born on November 13, 1923 in Marietta, Ohio, right across the river from the Fenton factory in Williamstown, West Virginia. From the time he was 4, he and his 6 sisters, his brother Frank, his parents, and 2 aunts, lived in this family home in Williamstown, where he attended the local elementary and high schools, graduating at the age of 16. He went on to attend Marietta College from 1940 to 1943, working at the glass factory part-time in summers. The summer after his junior year in 1943, he was drafted into the Army, where he served until February of '46. On leave from the Army in October of 1943, he married Eleanor Pryor. In December of that same year, he was sent overseas where he served for 2 years. In May 1946, Bill returned to work full-time in the Fenton sales department. His cousin, Bob Fenton Jr., was sales manager at the time and was to have trained him in sales, but he died of a heart attack that summer. So Bill was forced to learn all he could about sales on his own. He did this by traveling a territory with salesmen, eventually covering a 3-state territory. He also attended gift shows and began helping with the development of the Fenton line. By the end of 1948, Bill's father, Frank L. Fenton, died, and the management of the company passed into the hands of Bill, 25, and his older brother, Frank M. Fenton, 32, who had been working full-time for the company since graduating from Marietta College in 1936. Bill and Eleanor celebrated their 52nd wedding anniversary last year. They have 4 children and 8 grandchildren. Today, there are 11 second, third, and fourth generation family members involved in the business, including all of Bill and Eleanor's children. Bill and Frank have worked as a team for over half a century. Please join us as they recall some of the events of the last 50 years.
I want to talk a little bit about the early years of the company, just enough to give you some background. This photograph shows the factory building as it was done in 1907 when we first finished it. And all of these views are from in the northwest. And then this is a view of the plant in the 40s. And that sort of brings us to the place where Bill enters the picture and where Bill started to work for us and sort of brought the house down. And I think I ought to let him tell you that story.
My first job in June of 1940 was on the maintenance crew. Our workers went on vacation actually at 2 o'clock that morning, and they turned the fire out in the main furnace, and so then we were going to start and repair some of the piers on the furnace. We were inside the furnace, I was anyway, and I heard a crack and someone yelled, "Run." Someone said to me, "Run." And I ran out of the furnace and across the factory floor and dove out a window. So it was just someone was pushing me. The pressure maybe of the furnace coming down was pushing me from behind. And I went out of the window as that wall caved out, and I was buried under the building blocks of the wall. I went down toward the railroad tracks, and they had to dig me out over there.
What happened was that the stack fell in and took the whole roof and the whole building down with it. This was how many tons in that stack? You remember?
I don't know, but it was really something. It was 24 feet across and 105 feet high, and so you can imagine the force that would have.
I think this is the copy of the barber bottle that we made in 1936 for L.G. Wright. He brought his mold down that he had acquired from an old glass factory. We think he got it from the Hobbs-Bruck Union Company, but I'm not sure of that. And we made this for him in cranberry opalescent. It was one of the very first things that we ever made in cranberry opalescent. And our Chicago rep, Martin Simpson, saw it and said, "I'd like to have one of those." So Dad gave him one, and he took it back to Chicago. The buyer for the Allen B. Risley Company, a perfume company, was in the office one day and saw this Barber bottle and said, "I'd like to have that for a perfume, a cologne bottle." So Martin called Dad, and Dad said we couldn't possibly make it for him. It would cost way too much, but we'll design one for you. So we took this little fella here and made it in this color, like this. And then they put cologne in it, different colored cologne, put a fancy ribbon on it, put the wooden stopper in it, and then retailed it for $1. And we sold so many of those things. We had 8 different shops, all working to make the Risley bottle, and that put us in the hobnail business. We decided if hobnail would sell that well, we would make some items for our line. And so that's what we did. Now, you want to add to that story?
From then on, it seemed as though everything we made, if we made a particular shape, we also made a hobnail shape in that same item or basic mold. And it was hobnail was our bread and butter line from probably 1940, 39 or 40 up until until the present day. It's been a very, very important thing in the development of our company. In 1942, I was working out in the hot metal department of our plant, and I was carrying in, which is the guy that picks up a piece after it's been made, and carries it in, puts it in the annealing leer, a very difficult job. But anyway, we were working at the farthest point in our plant from the annealing leers, and the shop started producing these, and I was the only one carrying in. Usually they'll have 2 people, but I didn't have a helper that day, and I had to carry these in, and that day they ran my legs off. I ran from the start of the turn till the end of it because they set an all-time record in production that day, and I think it was partly because they wanted to watch me run the whole turn. But they were a great bunch of people, and I made a lot of friends when I worked out there that I still have today. But this little 1924 basket always brings that to my memory. My favorite glass of all of the glasses that we've made is the Burmese. And it has a history that goes back into the 1880s. A piece of it was reported to have been given to Queen Victoria, and she said it reminded her of a Burmese sunset. So it's an interesting story, and it adds a little romance to the piece. Actually, both Frank and I really admired some of those old Burmese pieces. And when Charlie Goh came to work with us, I think about 1961, he came because originally we didn't want him to leave our choir. He had the most beautiful tenor voice, and his company was going to transfer him to New Jersey. And Frank was the choir director, and I sang bass and sat next to Charlie. But Charlie came, and he's a very brilliant young man. I've heard people say he was the most brilliant of all the people they had known. And Charlie asked for challenges, and Frank said, "Charlie, why don't you develop a Burmese glass, find out how it's made, and develop the batch for it." In 1967, I believe it was, we hired a young designer from Pittsburgh. His name was Tony Rosina. And we talked about doing some hand decorating. And he said, well, I know the exact person to do that. And that's Louise Piper. So we said, Tony, go right ahead. So we started off with just a couple of decorators and Louise. And the first thing that they did in Burmese, it wasn't the first thing that they hand painted, was the Rose Burmese. And these were some of the pieces that we did.
And the first decoration that we actually put on the market that Louise had done was this decoration of violets on silver crest glass. It was suggested to us by a fellow named Carl Voigt, one of our reps, and he had seen a similar kind of decoration that was done somewhere else and thought we ought to make violets in the snow. This was the term he used. Louise did it beautifully, and it sold so well that before long Louise was training other people to do it. And I think it was one of the nice patterns which has carried through for a good many years. Louise came in 1968. When she came to us, Tony had persuaded her to come down, and I talked with her, and we finally reached an understanding that she would come to work for us. But she said there's one condition. She said, I'm already at retirement age, and I don't want the people here to know how old I am. So I had to agree not to tell anybody how old Louise Piper was. When she got to be 80 years old, some 15 years or more later, she then began to be proud of her age. But before that, she didn't want anybody to know because she looked 10 or 15 years younger than she was.
She loved anything that was beautiful. She was just a woman of beauty. After she passed away this past spring, her niece told me, she said, you know, Louise's birthday was in March, but she didn't like March. So she changed her birthday to May because she loved the beauty of the springtime flowers. These are the Rosaline pieces that we made, and Frank was very instrumental in working with our chemists and developing these, and he can tell you more about it than I can.
Well, I don't know about that, Bill, but I do find that Rosaline was a very unusual heat-sensitive glass. It has gold in it, which is the coloring material, and various opacifying agents like aluminum and fluorine and silica. The interesting thing about it was that Charlie Goh was one of those fellows who worked on this, but we never put it in the line while Charlie was still living. It came later on, so that when we decided we were going to make this, Charlie had already done the preliminary work on it. So we put his Rosaline batch in the furnace, and we made the original samples. For example, this piece is what we call Goh's Rose. In the factory, you see a very sharp delineation between the white and the pink. And wherever it got hot, the hottest, it turned pink, and the rest of it stays white. And this was made with his batch. But our problem with the batch was that it was so corrosive that after about 3 melts, it would eat a hole in the pot that we had, and we'd have to put another whole $3,000 pot back in the furnace again for the next 3 melts. So that at that time, we had a young man named Subodh Gupta as our glass chemist, a man from India who was very capable. So he went to work on Charlie's batch. And when he finally made it so it was less corrosive, it became Subodh's Rose. And that batch is more homogeneous throughout. You don't see the sharp delineation between the white and the pink.
Back in the 1950s, we worked with an advertising company from Philadelphia called John Faulkner Arndt, and they developed some trademarks for us. One was Clarence, that we called Clarence. It was a picture of a glass finisher, finishing a piece of glass. And this became very well known in the trade. And we later, in the 60s, decided, let's put that in a piece of glass. So we made a plate, which was the first in our Craftsman series, the Glass Worker, 1970. But you know, we tried for several years after we made that mold, we tried it in different colors, different treatments, couldn't find anything that really showed it up to its best. And so in 1970, we started to make Carnival again, and we put that in the line in January of 1970 in Carnival glass, and it was a tremendous success.
Tony Rosina designed all of these pieces.
Right, and he developed them and did a beautiful job.
Developed the whole thing. We just said we want craftsmen, and so he developed it.
Maybe if I could tell you about this one particular piece, when we made this around 1960 or 61, I can remember showing this at the first glass show, and a lady said, how do you get those little bubble optics in the piece? And I said, well, you know, this is very expensive to do. I said it has to be blown underwater, and the glass blowers have to wear diving suits, and the foremen all ride around in glass bottom boats to check on them. She said, really? And I said, no. I didn't know how to get out of it without making her feel foolish, because she believed me. But it is done with a bubble optic, and it traps air in between the two layers of glass.
Bob Barber was a glass artist, a studio artist. He had a small studio set up in a barn over near Athens, Ohio. And he used to come to us and get his batch materials to be used, because he could buy them for less than he could anywhere else. We had a good relationship, and one day he came in and said, my barn just burned down and burned the studio, and he said, I'm out of business. Do you have anything for me to do? And then in January of 1975, we gave Bob two glass workers, Delmer Stowasser and Dave Fetty. Delmer's retired now, and Dave is one of our hot metal foremen. And they worked with Bob making glass in the offhand method for 60 days. We said, make anything you want to, make whatever you'd like. So from that, we picked 4 items and put them in the line. And it was received very well. We started what we called a Robert Barber collection. Well, after about a year of this, we found out that it was costing us more to make than we were selling it for, and that the market wasn't as strong as we'd like to have it, so we discontinued it, stopped doing it that way. We kept Bob Barber on for a time, and then finally found somebody else that could use his services, and he went on to other companies. But this treatment, the hanging heart treatment, is the same kind of treatment that we used back in 1925 and 1926 with a group of glass workers. In 1925 and 26, it also cost us more to make than we sold it for, and we didn't stay with that very long. There's so many things we could tell you about Bob Barber. He made his own glass batches. He was a very fine physicist, and he understood glass and the way it worked. And his feeling was that when you start out, you think maybe you're going to make something, but the glass says, no, I want to be shaped this way. So then he would make it the way the glass wants to be made. And so he had unusual and different shapes.
Back in 1964, we made a line called Vasa Murina. This was one of the pieces, and this was the most expensive piece of glass I ever purchased. In fact, when we first got this item, made the first sample, I took one home to show it to my wife, and the next day when I went home for lunch, she said, I have carpet samples to match that vase, and I want to redo the living room and the dining room and the entranceway. So This was a costly piece for me. Vasa Murina means vessel of gems, and this was a vessel that had all these gem colors encased in the glass.
This is a lavabo or a lavabo. We pronounce it both ways, which we made in honey amber and other colors back when they were popular. I don't think you could sell them today.
Well, we made it
today's
in
market.
We made it in a rose overlay and a blue overlay and this honey amber. The biggest seller was in the milk glass, and I remember how difficult that piece was to make. And I went out and talked to one of our glass blowers, a man named Joe Burge, and I said, Joe, my dad always told me that you had the most skill, most just God-given skill of any of our glass workers. And I said, I think you could figure out how to make this, because we just had great difficulty. So every noon, Joe would come in to me with a new idea on how it was to be made. One day he said, you know, it's very simple. And he said, you just flop it flat on one side and then blow it in the mold. I of course, was more in sales. Frank was in production. We worked on many things together, but I sometimes told the story a little differently than he did, because I wanted to add value. I was romancing the piece in the minds of the buyer and the ultimate consumer.
We've been a good team over these years that Bill's been working with me, and I've been working with Bill. We used to have offices down on the first floor, and Bill's office was right next to mine with the door open in between. We could see each other from our desks. So when he got an important phone call that he wanted, he would wave at me and I would pick up the phone and listen. Then if he said something I didn't think ought to be said, I'd shake my head no, or vice versa. We listened in on each other, and it was easy for us to make decisions many times on the spot, knowing what the other fellow thought about it.
We've had an association, not only from the time I was born, where I always looked up to my big brother, my big and only brother, and it's been a great life. And this guy here has made it even greater, because we've been partners.
Your new mulberry vase represents the ultimate in glass artistry, and its history spans the same half-century as Bill's career. The mulberry color was first produced for a brief period in 1942 and 1943. The original pieces are highly sought after by collectors. Mulberry was reintroduced in 1989. It's made like cranberry glass with an inside layer of gold ruby, but instead of being covered with a layer of crystal glass, mulberry is covered with blue glass using a special glass working technique that creates a multicolor effect with deep violet at the top of the piece, fading to an aqua blue at the base. But this item has more history than just its color. The mold used for this vase is the number 194 mold, which was cast in 1945 and first used for the line in 1947 with a vase, urn, and pitcher in coin dot opalescent. All mulberry glass starts with the making of a ruby roll. The initial melting of the batch, including pure gold, takes about 2 days in a closed pot. Then the glass workers gather the glass and shape it into a long roll. Once the rolls have solidified, they're sent through the annealing leer, cooled to room temperature, and selected for the proper quality. Then they go into a special oven and are heated to about 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. This slow process of cooling and reheating allows the pure gold to develop the crystalline structure that will impart the deep violet color of mulberry. Once the roll has been reheated or struck and the color has developed, it's stuck on the end of a pipe and brought to a shop. Here it's reheated until it's soft and then brought to the caser. The caser cuts off a small bud onto the end of a hollow blowpipe. The bud is then reheated and shaped into a round ball and then flattened on the end. This causes the gold ruby glass to be thicker at the top and to fade away at the bottom of the piece to create the unique color gradation observed in mulberry. The pipe with the bud is then taken to a pot of light copper blue glass, where it will be covered with a layer of the blue glass. The piece is then blocked in a tub of soapy water, which gives it a round, smooth shape and even distribution of glass. Again, it is blown to increase the size of the air bubble, and then, after shaping on a marver plate, it is blown into an optic mold that puts a vertical rib pattern on the outside of the molten glass. The piece is then carried to the blower. After the piece is reheated, the blower rolls the hot glass cylinder on the marver, skillfully creating an even weight distribution from top to bottom, and cutting the top of the glass down so it will fit into the mold. Notice how he twists the pipe as he blows to create the spiral rib pattern. The blower uses a combination of compressed air and his own breath to shape the piece. The overblow, or thin bubble of glass on the top, serves to separate the piece from the pipe. Once the piece is cooled, it's snapped up by a warming-in worker who reheats the top for the finisher. The warming-in worker brings the piece to the finisher, who must quickly flare the top and apply the double crimp. The double crimp is a distinctive Fenton technique achieved by first using a fine-foot crimp to put a small ruffle on the top, and then using a second crimp to form the deep flutes. After the piece is finished, it's taken to the annealing oven, but along the way some pieces are spot checked to make sure that everything is going as it should on the production line. With a color such as mulberry, where the amount of color varies with the distribution of the gold ruby glass during the casing operation, it's important to make sure that the process is within the proper range. The piece then joins the others in the annealing oven, where they are cooled to room temperature over a period of 3 hours. As they come out of the annealing oven, every piece is checked to make sure that only the finest quality goes on to the decorating department. No two pieces of handmade glass are exactly the same. The finely detailed aster pattern requires several different operations. First, the decorator applies the petals using 2 different colors to achieve the proper shading. The paint is a finely crushed glass frit mixed with oil and turpentine that must be kept at exactly the right consistency. After the petals are applied, the decorator paints in the leaves, stems, and center detail. Each decorator who worked on this special mulberry vase signed her name to the finished piece, and each of the decorators has a distinct personal style that is apparent in her work. The design is completed by the delicate application of 2 gold bands that are quickly sprinkled with small bits of crushed glass called ice. Some of the ice sticks to the still wet gold and creates a unique sparkling effect. Finally, after another inspection, the pieces are put through the decorating leer where the 1000-degree temperature will melt the fine glass in the paint and fuse the decoration to the vase. The history of Fenton glass from 1905 to 1980 is recorded in detail in these 3 Fenton Art Glass history books available from QVC as number C17181. Or you can find them in gift stores, antique shops, and card shops, which carry Fenton glass. Another way to learn more about Fenton glass is to join one of the Fenton collector clubs. Each of them produce a newsletter full of information and provide a source for buying and selling discontinued Fenton ware. An annual convention is held at the Fenton Glass Factory in Williamstown during the early part of August.